Film is approximately 116 years old, yet of the first 20 feature films produced in Canada, only one is still in existence. The film you will see this evening is already 50 years old. In fact, it was 50 years ago from today that it was reviewed in Variety magazine. It's one of the few existing prints that we are aware of, and that is why we have not screened the print until tonight. Since we cannot find the original elements, we know that it is truly an archival print at the moment, a unique record. We decided that the best way to champion the need to do everything possible to keep films from disappearing is to get the word out. While TIFF does not have the facilities or resources to restore films, we do as much as possible to preserve prints that have come our way through donation, and The Mask is such a film. The film was made in 1961, and it was a groundbreaker. It was made in Canada, but it was the first Canadian feature to receive a wide distribution in the States, and it was Canada's first horror film. So I think I need to verify that. It used 3D sequences that were unique and have been acclaimed. In the time that I've been in this position at TIFF, I've received many requests to screen the print, but fearing any undue wear to the print, we have not screened it, and we have basically kept it in a climate-controlled facility. Unfortunately, the public will not be able to see the film again after tonight until it is restored, and that is a pity, since it is a key film in the Canadian canon.
So tonight we introduce a text that has been several years in the making, a collection that highlights and celebrates more than a century of Canadian horror filmmaking, from the 1913 release of The Werewolf until now. But from the perspective of this anthology, Canadian horror cinema offers so many more films worthy of attention as they too unsettle this mundane civil society with threats. This book begins with a general consideration of the diversity of Canadian monsters and follows with a consideration of crushing imposition of American culture. It examines the collective imagination as interpreted through literature and adapted into cinematic representations. And it takes an historical look at gory slashers of the tax shelter era. It also reflects on the legendary malevolence of our indifferent environment in eco-horror, as well as on animation and the avant-garde as unexpected vehicles for the macabre. And finally, we conclude with an homage of sorts in the single most important figure of Canadian horror cinema, David Cronenberg. And it is our hope tonight, and in reading the book overall, that in fleshing out the nuances of Canadian horror cinema from a critical perspective, that readers and audiences will also uncover the obscure sources, intricate manifestations of the deep terror of the soul that petrifies the Canadian imagination. Andre, if you'd like to step up. Andre Loiselle, the other co-editor, will maybe introduce the screening at this point.
I think that after about 60 years, or let's say 55 years of Canadian cinema, now we've reached a point where we don't have to be too concerned about what is Canadian and what isn't. We do have a very solid cinema now, and now we can start to re-embrace the film that perhaps 20, 30 years ago we would have been a bit more concerned about talking about, because we would have been afraid that by embracing those films, we would have given up on a distinct Canadian cinema. Now that we're much more comfortable, we do have a bunch of big names. We have a minor film festival, I think, here in Toronto that takes place in September, I think. So there are good things about Canadian cinema, and one of the good things is that now we actually feel more confident to embrace a wide range of films, even if those films are perhaps not quite as distinctly Canadian as things such as Nobody Waved Goodbye or Going Down the Road. Or are they? Is The Mask not as distinctively Canadian as Nobody Waved Goodbye? One of the things that we try to argue in the book is that many of those horror films that on the surface seem to have nothing to say about Canada actually deal with our fears. Maybe not uniquely Canadian fears, but typically Canadian fears. That's one of the things that we're trying to talk about. That those horror films really are somewhat distinctly Canadian. The Mask, I would argue, is distinctly Canadian in very, very many ways. On the face of it, it's a film about drug addiction, it seems to me. But if you dig a bit deeper, there's all sorts of Canadian fears in this. The one that's most interesting to me is what The Mask represents. The Mask is this foreign influence that when you put it on imposes sensationalist images on your innocent eyes.